Hi, bookaholics. Today we are going to try to grasp and understand a very serious issue that is happening in our society today. I remember being in grade school and probably being taught in a history class or a social studies class about people trying to burn or ban books or censor books in some type of way. And never did I think that that would happen in my lifetime with such fervent, but yet sneaky degree. And it's happening right now. This, again, is something that I consider a very serious issue. The books that are being affected are based on gender and race. Some people don't want these stories to be told from the perspective of the authors who are telling it. And so this is one of the things that Bookaholic will be addressing throughout the year and supporting libraries and authors of different voices. And we will do everything we can here at Bookaholic to make sure from our point that this does not happen. We want to keep these books in schools and in our public libraries. And so after this, we'll be speaking to Francisca Goldsmith, who's going to help us understand this wave of banning books. Hello, Francisca. Am I saying your name right?
You are, and it's so good to hear that you're going to be taking this on as a year-long project, because certainly you're a good friend of intellectual freedom, and it's wonderful to hear you joining the cause here.
Definitely, most definitely. And before we get into the issue, let's set the tone for the audience, the listening audience, the viewing audience, to understand why I chose you as the expert on banned books.
Okay, I'm a librarian by profession, and I've been in that profession for a long time. And my interest in intellectual freedom actually goes back to early childhood.
Mhm.
When I first heard a classmate, I think we were in second grade, say that she wasn't allowed to read a particular book. And it
Oh,
was such a strange announcement. It was as if she had announced that she wasn't allowed to eat food.
oh,
And so I went home and I asked about that. And I said, Has anyone ever heard of this before?" And of course, everyone else had, but I was assured then and there that this was not something that was going to be perpetrated on me, and that was true. Um,
right,
Family members might have disapproved of what I was reading in terms of taste or
right,
wisdom
right,
of choice, but
right.
those are things that, of course, in every family we all have opinions about how Aunt Rosie picks horrible colors to wear, etc.
Exactly. That's along those lines.
uh, so anyway, when I was in library school, we actually attended the trial of a poem in federal
Oh,
court, and that was for my intellectual freedom class. That was fascinating.
wow.
And since then, I've gone on to have a career working both with teenagers and with collections in general in public libraries, and teaching library staff and supporting their professional development, which is what I do now as a consultant.
Mhm.
Um, but along the way, I have been deeply involved in intellectual freedom practices. And intellectual freedom, of course, is the opposite of banning. It's
Right.
the position that we all have the right to intellectual inquiry. We don't have the right to act against people. We do have the right to find out about ideas, no matter
Right.
how distasteful those ideas might be to others.
Correct. 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 Wow. Wow. Well, I'm deeply disturbed by this issue. And I'm not saying I'm not going to try to make this a political thing, but recently the Republican governor for Virginia, the newly minted Republican governor for Virginia, that was said to be the impetus of him winning. Was a parent in Virginia who, so he was getting on that bandwagon. I'm not saying anything for or against the man that became the governor of Virginia, but I'm saying that that banning book movement helped to spur him winning. And so I find that disturbing. And there's been different articles popping up on my computer and in my email about this being an issue in different states. And I'm just reading the couple of sentences from an article I just picked. It says, parents are fervently advocating for school children to read less about race, gender, and sexuality by trying to force certain books out of student libraries altogether. The latest salvo in America's culture war for young minds. And my young mind, the very first podcast I give homage to my librarian, Mrs. Ashworth. And Mrs. Ashworth was my hero, and she's still very much my hero. And she introduced me to all types of books. One of the most pivotal being Judy Blume's Are You There, God? It's Me, Margaret. And I believe in this time frame, maybe even the title of that book might be challenged by some people. But the mantra inside of that book, and this book was so important for me as a young teen at that time. I can't even go into the emotional depth of how important that book was. But one of the mantras, which seems kind of funny right now, but it was like, I must increase my bust, was the mantra of the main character. And I don't have to do that anymore. Somehow they did increase from the flat-chested years of teenagehood. But that was my issue at the time, and I could relate to the main character. And therefore I just read one after the other Judy Blume books. And I believe she is still living, but Judy Blume should still be a very celebrated author of young adult writing. And I don't know why I don't hear her name more. I don't know if there's just simply more stories and maybe more modernity to be told, which is also good. But that book, I would think that if this was going on when I was reading Are You There, God? It's Me, Margaret, it might have been banned, and that would have
You
been a
know,
disservice.
actually, it was challenged at the time.
Oh, okay. Things I didn't
And
know.
yeah, and Judy Blume is an old-time supporter of intellectual freedom, and she really got onto the intellectual freedom train early because several of the books that she wrote, even as they were newly published, were being challenged. And
Oh,
I want to pause here and distinguish some terms
okay.
because I think that's important for everyone to understand what the dangers are and what simply family relations are.
Yes.
So when we say banned, we're talking about removing intellectual content, be it a book, a magazine article, um, a curriculum thread, a movie, a song, any intellectual property. We're talking about removing it from access by anyone, or
Wow.
at the very least, access by anyone of a certain age.
Okay. Okay.
When we talk about challenges, we're talking about the content being publicly questioned, which is not the same as banning it. It is the first step toward banning,
Okay.
potentially, but not necessarily. So, for instance, you might find, let's say you were in a library in 1970 that didn't do a very good job of distinguishing between its youth collection and its adult collection.
Okay. Okay.
And you came across Lolita
Yes.
in the
Mhm.
children's section.
Cool. Okay.
You might challenge the placement of that by
Right.
going to the library staff and saying, I really question the wisdom of shelving this in the picture book area.
Right. Right.
And with any challenge, library staff are trained to respond in a series of steps. And one of
Okay.
them is to actually take the challenge seriously. So
Right.
look at it. And, I would say in that particular case, if I were the staff and I said,
Right.
Lolita in the picture book section, maybe that was a mistake.
Yes. Exactly.
And move it. And that doesn't mean that children can't get at it because
Right.
children have access to all the library, but it means it's not being marketed to them directly,
Right.
which makes sense.
Right.
That's different from banning. Banning
Right.
is the person who comes into the library and says, no one should have access or no child should have access to this
Right.
title. Not just
Okay.
my child, but
Right.
your child and
Right.
children I don't know.
Right.
That's banning, or that's
Right.
requesting the ban.
Right.
In terms of your own family members, children, not adults, uh, you have, as a parent, one has parental control over children. One
Right.
can say to the child, "No, you may never have ice cream before dinner."
Right. Right.
Is that banning the child from ice cream? No,
No.
it's
Right.
controlling behavior to a certain degree.
Right.
So, as a parent, you could, I would hope that you wouldn't, but you could say, when you go to the library, I don't want you to look at any materials outside of the children's room.
Right. 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 Right.
But you cannot say to your next door neighbor's child
That's correct.
that. And you
Exactly.
certainly cannot say to the community at large, no one should have access to
Correct.
anything
Correct.
outside of this collection.
Correct.
Now, when we talk about school libraries, teachers act in loco parentis, which means that they are functioning as parental control within the school context.
Yes.
So they can't, teachers, school librarians who are also teachers, can say, no, Stephen, I don't want you borrowing a book from over here. I want you to limit yourself to over here.
Mhm. Mhm.
That's not
Mhm.
banning those books to Stephen,
Right.
but it
Right.
is acting as his parent in this
Right.
situation.
Correct.
However, what I can't do is say to Stephen, Stephen, I don't think that you should look at that particular content. I don't think anybody should look at that content. Class,
Mm.
no one n- no one needs to know about this subject. So we are not going to look at this subject at all.
Right. Right. Right.
That
Right.
would be totally inappropriate. And what
Right.
would also be inappropriate would be the parent who came in and says, I'm Stephen's grandfather. But as Stephen's grandfather, I am saying to you, the teacher, you may not take any of these 32 class
Mm.
members into the library and look at this content.
Right. Okay.
You
Yes.
can't take that position. Now, one
Right.
of the things that's really, really important when we talk about challenges within a library context is we always, always ask the challenger if that person has looked at the work in its entirety.
Mm. Okay.
And there's a big difference between saying, I heard that there's a
Yes.
bad word in this book,
Mhm.
then I've read this entire book, and I think the pejorative name calling in it is offensive.
Mhm. 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 Mhm.
Even though I have read it in context. Now, I'm still not gonna withdraw it as the librarian,
Right.
but you have respected the basic rule of looking at the whole in context. Because
Right.
just like banning Stephen from having ice cream before dinner, you're not banning ice cream per se. What you're doing is you're saying you can't have sweets
Mm.
before dinner.
Right. Right. Exactly.
What's happening now with these bannings, which have skipped over the challenge completely,
Yes.
just
Okay. Correct.
entirely.
Correct.
Um, but what's happening is the absolute dogged refusal to look at the whole and simply consider what one has heard about an element of the whole. So it's kind of like saying, you know, you can make swear words out of letters of the alphabet. So we're going to say ban the alphabet because you could take those letters and you
Mm.
can make them into ungodly words.
Right.
Total silliness.
Right.
The other thing that's happening now that's wildly different and really terrifying
Mhm.
is skipping not only past full context, but also skipping past the responsible body for considering whether or not to go further in removing the material, and
Right.
instead calling the police. And that has happened both in Michigan and Wyoming.
Oh my gosh.
In both places, you will be relieved to hear the police have said, not our business.
Right.
Uh, but
Good.
still, this really, really reeks of World War II and Nazi book
Yes.
book bannings and book burnings.
Yes.
It's
Yes.
going beyond the intellectual circle and going to enforcement that is, I won't say judicial because judicial is another thing and we can talk about that too if you like, but going to pure force and saying, I don't want to confront this idea. I don't want to have anything to do with this idea. And I'm afraid, and this is what's really going on. I'm
Mhm.
afraid that if I take that to the authorities who control what is in or out of the collection, they're not going to listen to me because they have another agenda. So
Mhm.
instead, I'm going to go to the big guns and I'm going to go
Right.
to the sheriff and say,
Right.
Sheriff, they shouldn't have this book in the library. Go
Mhm.
get it.
Right.
I'm so relieved that in both Wyoming and Michigan, in one the sheriff and the other a policeman said, no.
Yeah.
Just
You
no.
know, those are two stories stories I have not heard, and I am so glad that did not take place. You know, even for Wyoming, I'm surprised. I'm surprised about the Wyoming part, but thank goodness they did not take up
Yeah.
that, mantle of whatever you want to call that.
And then
Wow.
when we look at Texas, which is where in
Yes.
Liberty, Texas, they've composed this list of 850 titles.
850.
Yeah. And the thing that is so, I mean, there's so many things wrong with this, but an element that makes it clear how great the disconnect between context and complaint is is that those 850 titles clearly were not looked at directly. They
Right.
were picked out of a library catalog because, for instance, there'll be the 14th of 26 in a series of murder mysteries.
Mhm. Mhm.
Now, there's nothing particular about number 14 that isn't represented in the other 25,
Right.
but they just happened to light on that title, so they added that
Right.
title to their list. Some
Right.
of the materials are so old that sure, a library might have them, but they're hardly active. And once again, they were just
Right.
pulled from. I heard that someone said that
Yes.
maybe this was, and
Yeah.
as you mentioned, what's the areas that are really being assaulted right now
Mm-hmm.
are those related to sexuality, to gender identity, to race, to political and historical ramifications around racism.
Right.
Um, so those are not unusual.
Right.
But the other element, and this is important, I think, for people to understand too, and why schools are so often involved. The other element in not in political book bannings, not like during the Nazi era, but in American book challenges and book bannings, tend to target materials that were published for three specific age groups, which is really interesting to think about. 4-year-olds, 11-year-olds, and 16-year-olds. Now, what do those three age groups have in common?
Wow.
What those three age groups are all on the brink of a giant step in independence.
Yes. Yes.
And it's actually a knee-jerk response of fear to that burgeoning independence.
Yes.
And when we
Yes.
look at it that way, it's still horribly dangerous. It doesn't remove any of the danger, but what it does is put it in psychosocial terms that make it understandable. It's not, "Oh my goodness, why would someone ban a book?" It's,
Right.
"Oh, you're scared. You're scared that your 4-year-old's gonna discover there are people in the world besides you." Or
Right.
you're scared that
Right.
your 11-year-old is gonna stop valuing the family above her best friends. Or
Right.
you're scared your 16-year-old's gonna leave home. Oh my god, or she could get
Yes.
pregnant.
Yes.
And then she would
Right.
be a parent. And then what will I do? So
Right. Right.
those it's those
Yes.
elements that
Yes.
and that's why it's more often going to happen either in a school or in a youth collection in a public library.
Yes. 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 I understand that all so much better now. Oh, wow. You really have lifted up a cloud for me. That doesn't mean that it's still not
It's
deadly
horrible.
serious, but you did help me a lot with that. And now to go back to what you were saying about Texas, I have it right here, the 800 and some books right here, including one of the books was The New Jim Crow, Mass Incarceration in the Age of Colorblindness and Boy Erased, a
Mhm.
memoir of identity, faith, and family. Those were two of the books that were in that collection. And I find it very disturbing about a book that was recent book, a recent champion book, a recent movie, The Hate You Give. The Hate You Give, which is which is a reality
Mhm.
of Black life. It's just simply, I mean, it's not to say that everybody gets murdered in the end, but it's happened in Black life. And it's the fact that, and I think what really, uh, really angers me is that, and then people are starting to realize it, but Black parents have to have the talk with our children. And
Early, early, early.
early in life, and and it doesn't matter who you are, whether you live in the whatever you want to categorize as the ghetto, the hood, or whatever. President Obama and Mrs. Obama had to have the
Mhm.
talk. So no matter how high, quote unquote, you are in society or how low you are in society of blackness, you have to have the talk. And, hey, some of these books help us to have the talk. The Hate You Give surrounds the talk, So, I don't know. I feel very I want to champion. I am going to champion. I am going to support, but I feel a little bit helpless in this whole scope of things. So hopefully, towards the end of our conversation, you can give myself and the audience some ways that we can be empowered to help defeat this thing of trying to erase people's stories, trying to erase who we are and our histories and how we feel today. You just can't go about erasing people's stories. So that's just what gets me just
Yeah.
out of control, out of order. Well, and I hope I'm not putting you on the spot right now, but I would like to see and I've seen some of these in different places, and maybe we can't rank them per se, and maybe we can put a lot of the links to these books in the show notes. You can give me a more exhaustive list maybe later, but let's discuss some of the books, maybe like the top 5 books right now that are being challenged.
One of the books that has appeared over and over in the past several years, appeared again this year at the very top of the list, is Alex Gino's middle grade novel, which was published under the name of George.
Mm-hmm.
That was the title.
Mm-hmm.
And Alex Gino, the author, has undertaken an absolutely wonderful crusade to retitle the book as
Okay.
Melissa. And
Oh, okay.
the book is about a genderqueer child.
Okay.
And by retitling the book, the author sees themselves as honoring the protagonist, because
Right.
the protagonist wants to be Melissa, not George.
Right.
So
Right.
it's but that's not what's getting the book in trouble. What's getting the book in trouble, and has been for years, is it's about a genderqueer child
Right.
for children, and it's middle
Right.
grades, so we're talking like 8-year-olds.
Okay.
Um,
Okay.
and it's written by a genderqueer author.
And so if you read this book, you're going to become genderqueer.
Yeah, just like, if you read about, oh, I don't know, school shootings, you might go shoot up a school.
Right.
Go
Oh,
figure.
right.
Um,
Right.
sorry,
Right.
not to make light, but
No, no,
there's a
but
real logical disconnect.
yes, it
Um,
is.
so that has shown up. I think it was published about 10 years ago.
Oh,
Not quite.
really?
Yeah, it's not a brand new book. Um, it's always been wildly popular. Alex Gino really, really gets kids of that age and really knows
Okay.
how to engage both the humor and the pathos of being 8 or 9
Right.
years old,
Yeah. Oh my
which
gosh.
which can be pretty horrible as well as
Yeah.
pretty fun.
Yeah.
Um, so that's one. Another that has shown up literally for decades
Hmm.
is I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings by Maya
Now,
Angelou. Now,
yes.
this is a book that was originally published for adults, became an instant hit among teenagers, um, has been on curriculum lists for years and years and years and years and years. What's wrong with it? There are a lot of things, quote unquote, wrong with it. And I'm not saying they're wrong. Obviously,
Right.
I'm being facetious.
Right.
Um, First of all, the author's black. The author's female. Oh my
Wow.
lord, the author's also over 6 feet tall.
Yes.
So there's
Yeah.
another strike.
Right.
Um, but the worst part, besides the fact that it's written by a black woman, is that it is a memoir, so it
Mhm.
is her own story of her adolescence,
Right.
and it involves her sexual abuse.
Right.
So obviously, we can't have teenagers
Yeah.
reading about that because we know that no teenagers are ever sexually abused.
No, absolutely not.
So um, there's another
Okay.
perennial, just absolutely perennial.
Okay.
Um, Other Black women are often on the list, as in every year since the book was published. The
Mhm.
Bluest Eye, um,
Yes.
which is written not only by a Pulitzer Prize winner, but also a Nobel Prize winner.
Correct.
Toni Morrison's
Right.
um, body of work includes novels that probably no teenager would really be interested in reading just because of they take a certain amount of life
Depth.
experience when one
Yes.
is past 40, I think, to,
Right.
to feel any connection to. However, The
Right.
Bluest Eye is not one of them. The Bluest Eye, although it was published for adults, is a lot like I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings, extremely relevant and of high interest among teens.
Mhm. Mhm.
Not just Black teens. Oh my goodness. Can you imagine there are other teens besides Black teens who are interested in reading Black authors? Go figure.
Oh,
Um,
why?
so,
Why?
so um, because she is a Nobel Prize winner, we can make certain assumptions about um, her critical literary um, reputation, which is extremely high.
Right.
Um, and The Bluest Eye is exceedingly well written. I mean, it's content aside, just the mastery of the prosody in it. When it first came out, the reviews of it in quote unquote serious journals was praiseworthy because
Right.
it's not just about the content; it is also about how are these sentences crafted? How does the
Right.
plot develop? How does the character become real as opposed to a device to keep the plot moving?
Right.
All of those things are just stellar. And so this
Exactly.
book for years has been a feature on advanced placement English curricula throughout the
Right.
country.
Right.
It's a book that people in the UK and in Australia are highly familiar with because
Mhm.
she's a world renowned author, et
Yes.
cetera, et cetera. However, The Bluest Eye not only deals with sexual abuse, but it also deals with racial identity and the problems facing a girl who really has had no choice but to understand American values as, surprise, valuing white people over
Yeah.
Black
Yeah.
girls.
That's right. That's
Um, so it's extremely truthful. I mean,
yes.
it was truthful 30 years ago. It's
Yeah.
truthful now.
Yes. Yeah.
So that's a third
Right.
perennial.
Right.
Now,
Yes. Yes.
one that was highly featured some years ago, then went away and is now back for a different reason, is Harry Potter.
Wow.
Um,
Witches.
Witches, exactly. So
War.
when Harry Potter first became, not when Harry Potter was first published, but when
Mhm.
Harry Potter first became popular, which was,
Ah,
as soon as the first movie came out,
right.
um, the whole group of people who are terrified that if children read about witches, they obviously will, join the
Gonna be
local
doing spells.
Wiccan community. Because I know every time I read a book about Baptists, I want to go join a Baptist church. That's
Yes,
the first thing that occurs to
I
me.
know.
So
It's so exotic to be a Baptist. I'm a Baptist. It's so exotic and intriguing.
anyway, so for years, people who were scared of witchcraft, and
Yes.
we're also talking about, we're not even talking really witchcraft. We're talking about kids' idea of wizardry.
Right. Exactly.
Um,
Exactly.
so it had problems there. Now, this year, or about 18 months ago, the author became exceedingly stupid in public and started dating transgender people,
Oh,
and has really made a name for herself as being anti-transgender, and has tried to walk herself back from it, only to walk herself deeper into her foolishness. And so there's been backlash against the Harry Potter books. Now, interestingly, that backlash has not called for them to be banned. That backlash has simply said, we're not interested in buying these anymore. Okay, that's fine. If you want to have an economic boycott because you don't like the position an artist took, that certainly is your prerogative. I mean, that's not impinging on my intellectual freedom or in your intellectual freedom. And I think it's a good illustration of how it is possible to handle what you consider objectionable without creating an intellectual freedom issue that involves anyone except the party against whom you have a grudge, i.e., in this case, the author. That's only
wow.
4. Sorry, I'm not going to be able to pull another one out, but I will send you lots.
That's fantastic because some of those are a total surprise, and I'm just disheartened that the list I have seen, just involves a lot of Black voices.
Yeah.
And like I said before, when I was talking about the hate you give, it's our stories, it's our truths, and how dare you even challenge those? And I'm a big fan of another thing that Bookaholic is working on for the next year is to get more people to read diverse books. And I think that with the racial reckoning of the last few years, that would help more people to understand where we're coming from. Now, again, not to get political, because some people see this as political, but the phrase, let's just say the phrase, Black Lives Matter, that is a phrase. And that is a phrase that took people on a journey of ridiculousness. And it's because they don't want to address or feel that Black lives do matter. People would take up the mantra, oh, all lives matter. Well, we know that. Don't insult our intelligence. Everybody knows every single life matters. Yes. But we're talking about in the context of the fact that it was just willy nilly that we would be shot for any old thing, and you couldn't even drive or jog or
Go to
walk
the store.
while go to the store while being Black. And so you know what we were talking about. Why are you trying to squash that phrase, Black Lives Matter? And I have stood in my home and been totally frustrated because here's another subject. We've been so colonized, even African Americans, that there were some African Americans that didn't want anybody. I wish that girl wouldn't have done that Black Lives Matter thing. It was like, what? And I mean, I was hearing that. I was hearing that. So it's very disturbing, that was even presented. But that's one of the reasons, and one of the other reasons I am championing intellectual freedom and the fact that people need to read more diverse books. And so, to keep people like me from falling off the cliff and you're
Please
going,
don't, please don't.
go falling off the cliff. Give me and the audience some empowerment of what we can do to combat the challenges, and maybe never get to the degree of banning.
One thing to do is to become super, super active in your local community in a few civic areas. One
Okay.
of which is if you've got a public library district and that public library district has a library board, go to their board meetings, go to their board meetings, go to their board meetings. If there are openings on the board, run for election, or if it's a board by appointment, then, make friends with whoever does the appointing, find out what all's involved, because ultimately in public libraries, it's the board, not the administration of the library, that's making the final rules. Which is good.
Now,
Which is
yes,
good
well,
because you're not
I'm
being,
on the Friends of the Library for my local
yeah.
library. And I'm a relatively new member. I've been on the
Mhm.
board for about 2 years, but under the pandemic. So some of them haven't even seen my face in real life. It's just been on Zoom. But I am planning to approach the librarian and the board about things that I would like to see. We send out a newsletter, but rarely do I find that a lot of diverse books are listed in that. Rarely do the Poems Corner is not representative of the community
Those
at
are great
large.
places to get involved.
Yes, and
Just
so I'm
fantastic.
planning on writing a letter.
Okay, do write the letter, but also go to those board meetings. Really go to
Yes,
those board meetings. Find out, how healthy your particular public library is in terms of its commitment to intellectual freedom, in terms of its support of all manner of voices from the community, in terms of providing access to voices that may not even be present in your community. Um, Rarely do books by people with disabilities get banned, but just as rarely are they hyped much. So, there's another area to, just watch out for. Or, do these people have a voice?
right.
Um, so that's one thing. If you have a commitment to public education and you have a very, very, very strong stomach, getting involved in school boards, in PTAs, in school bodies like that. Some communities, I'm pretty familiar with how things operate in California vis-a-vis public education. Um, and besides the school boards and besides the parent teacher associations, there also are site councils and other quasi governmental, quasi community member input leadership bodies that exist. Find out what they are in your area and get involved, get involved, get involved. We
Okay.
certainly, one of the things that was just hugely motivating for me back in the day was getting involved in my public school district area, not having a child in that district, but working in that district as a librarian in the public library, getting really, really invested in the public schools too. And that brought around, through a lot of effort, getting librarians into the schools, getting new libraries built, all kinds of stuff. So those are two approaches. The
Yes.
third is to actually get involved in the Intellectual Freedom Caucus, which is part of the American Library Association. You don't need to be a librarian. Um, but they're the body that tracks published stories about challenges and bannings, internationally as well as nationally. So it's instructive to see what they're up to, what they're doing. Each year, they're the body that publishes the list of titles that were challenged or banned during the past year, that sort of thing. And then the coalition as a whole involves not only the intellectual freedom body at the American Library Association, but also involves the American Publishers Association, the authors, and I don't, everybody having anything to do with the publishing. I won't. I want to say industry on the one hand, but bigger than industry commitment. So those are three things from really hyper local to oh, another thing with both public libraries and with schools is find out if your local one has a foundation. And those foundations obviously are in the money raising business for that body, that institution. Make sure that they have a commitment to inclusive and diverse voices, so that if you've got a library foundation whose purpose is is supplementing collections by giving $1 million every year, making sure that there's a writer attached to that has to be spent on materials that are truly representative, for instance. Um, and you found me because of Audiophile magazine.
Yes.
And one of the things that we've been doing at Audiophile for a number of years now and have a deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper active commitment to doing, and I think there's room for you personally to play here, um, is making sure that we are publicizing as highly as we can authentic voices.
Yes.
So audiobooks by Black authors, yes, but performed
Yes.
by narrators who identify with the communities that
Yes.
they are, whose stories they are telling. So
Right.
whether that means that there is a match along racial identity lines or sexual identity lines or language,
Mhm.
native language lines.
Mhm.
For instance, having a Cuban American narrator for a Cuban author instead
Yeah.
of having a Mexican American narrator.
Right.
I mean, it can
Correct.
can really drill down there. But
Yes.
we spend a lot of time trying to find those specifics and
Right.
then publicize them as much as possible. And when you talk about what can you do in your own world,
Yes.
start a book club. Um, and one of the things that you can do is start an audiobook club,
Mhm.
because with access to things like Overdrive and other online library vendors for audiobooks,
Mhm.
you can have everybody listening to authentic voices, and you can have people who, you may be the only Black person they know in person, you may be the
Right.
only voice that they hear. Expose them to other Black voices too,
Yes.
and and Pakistani voices and Asian American voices,
Right.
and.
Right.
Um,
Right.
but there's something, we all know this. There's something different in hearing the voice in your head when you're looking at print and
Mhm.
hearing
Mhm.
someone who intimately knows what the author wanted it to sound like and making it
Yes.
sound that way.
Yes.
And
Yes.
that's a way to educate people who are at base consider themselves your friend.
Right.
But do they have enough experience with the context of your world to
Right.
to be a good ally? Yes, they're an
Yes.
ally, but make them a better
Yeah.
ally. Expose
Yeah.
them to more voices.
Yes, yes. Those are wonderful suggestions. And not to toot my own horn, I'm at least doing two of them. The other is I'm a member of the ALA. And so, you are so correct. And when you said the audio book club, it's like my brain exploded. so those are all fantastic, and you have certainly brought me a lot of calm and perspective, because this is an issue that has been really, really disturbing me. But you've given me some thoughts, and hopefully the audience some thoughts and processes that we can undertake to handle these issues.
Yeah, we're not going to solve them. I mean,
No.
the fact of the matter is book banning's been going on for 2,300 years. So,
Correct,
we're
correct, correct,
not going
correct.
to die in our generation.
Right, exactly. But
But
I think
certainly we can change what's going on now.
right, most definitely, most definitely. And I think for some people, um, people began to relax a little bit on a lot of different issues. And they thought, oh, well, like, for example, when President Barack Obama was elected, people
Mhm.
thought automatically we were in a post-racial society, and we weren't. As a matter of fact, it came roaring back that we weren't, in just a horrible way. And so I just think that every generation has to be
Yeah.
aware that things are going to go in the ebb and the flow of
Mhm.
life.
Mhm.
Things that you thought were dead are going to come back,
Mhm.
but be prepared for
Mhm.
them to come back. I think a lot of people, including me, were surprised with some of the things that came roaring back. But we have to have conversations like these
Mhm.
to put ourselves in perspective, and to know that we are not disenfranchised, that we are empowered, and we can do our part in keeping the negative from overwhelming us and overtaking us.
Yeah, we have to show up. I mean, that's the first rule.
Yes,
Show up.
yes, most definitely. We have to show up. Well, Francisca, would appreciate you here at Bookaholic Podcast, and we just really thank you for your authority and wisdom on this subject.
Deirdre, thank you so much for having me. I'll send you some lists so you can make a file. And it's been wonderful talking with you. It's been
Thank you.
delightful. Keep in touch.
I will. I will. Thank you so much. I
Okay.
appreciate you. Wow, what a wonderful and powerful conversation that is just making me think right now. I've just got so many thoughts going on. And so we will bring you more information that she promised, and we will have it in the show notes. And we will also have it in the YouTube at the bottom of the video. And we just thank you for joining us and supporting us. Bookaholic, book-a-holic.com is the website. And you can hear the podcast on Apple, Spotify, Google, and anywhere else you listen to your podcast. My social media handles are below, and how you can get in contact with me is also below. And there you have it. We appreciate your listening and watching, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you for joining the Bookaholic Podcast. We appreciate your support. Remember to subscribe to the podcast, follow us on Instagram at True Bookaholic. You can also email us at readingjunkie@book-a-holic.com. Don't forget to support your local library and independent bookstores.